Black professor denied entry to his own bank. Then the entire town did something unexpected. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Millbrook, a mid-sized city nestled in the heart of America's Midwest. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying the scent of freshly fallen leaves and the faint aroma of pumpkin spice from the corner cafe. It was on this ordinary Tuesday that Dr. Marcus Washington, a 62-year-old professor of sociology at Millbrook University, found himself walking purposefully towards the imposing facade of First National Bank. Marcus cut an impressive figure as he strode down the sidewalk. At 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and a trim build maintained by regular tennis matches and morning jogs, he defied many of the stereotypes associated with men his age. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close to his scalp, and a neatly trimmed beard framed his strong jawline. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, lending him an air of scholarly distinction. Today, Marcus had foregone his usual work attire of pressed slacks and a button-down shirt. Instead, he wore a pair of well-worn jeans, a faded Millbrook University sweatshirt, and comfortable sneakers. It was his day off, a rare Tuesday when he didn't have classes or meetings, and he had a long list of errands to run. As he approached the bank, Marcus's mind wandered to the reason for his visit. His youngest daughter, Amelia, was getting married in just 3 months. He and his wife Evelyn had been saving for years to give their little girl the wedding of her dreams. Today, he planned to withdraw a significant portion of those savings to pay the caterer and florist, who both required deposits to secure their services for the big day. Lost in thoughts of seating arrangements and cake flavors, Marcus almost missed the subtle shift in atmosphere as he neared the bank's entrance. The security guard, a stocky man with a close-cropped haircut and a perpetual frown, straightened up as Marcus approached. The guard's hand drifted towards his hip, where a holstered pistol rested ominously. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his tone brusque and tinged with suspicion. Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback by the guard's confrontational stance. "Good morning," he replied, his deep voice calm and measured. "I'm just here to make a withdrawal." The guard's eyes narrowed as they swept over Marcus's casual attire. "I'm going to need to see some ID before I can let you enter." Flicker of annoyance passed through Marcus, quickly suppressed by years of experience in navigating such situations. He reached for his wallet, only to feel a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. In his haste to get out of the house this morning, he had grabbed his old wallet, the one without his driver's license or bank card. "I apologize," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice level. "Seems I've left my ID at home, but I'm Dr. Marcus Washington. I've been banking here for over 30 years. Surely one of the tellers can vouch for me?" The guard's expression hardened. "No ID, no entry. That's bank policy." Marcus took a deep breath, tamping down the frustration building in his chest. "I understand the need for security, but this is ridiculous. I'm a longtime customer and a respected member of this community. I'm simply here to access my own money." As their voices rose, other bank customers began to take notice. A young woman in a business suit shot Marcus a sympathetic look as she hurried past, while an elderly couple whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Marcus and the guard. Just as the situation seemed on the verge of escalating further, a familiar voice called out from inside the bank. "Dr. Washington? Is everything all right out here?" Marcus turned to see Sarah Chen, one of his former students, hurrying towards the entrance. Sarah had graduated 5 years ago and now worked as a loan officer at the bank. Her face was a mixture of concern and confusion as she took in the scene before her. "Sarah," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "I seem to have forgotten my ID, and your colleague here is refusing to let me enter the bank." Sarah's brow furrowed as she looked from Marcus to the guard. "There must be some mistake. Dr. Washington is a valued customer and a pillar of our community. I can personally vouch for his identity." The guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "Ma'am, bank policy clearly states—" "I'm well aware of bank policy," Sarah interrupted, her tone firm. "I'm also aware that we have discretion in certain circumstances. Washington has been banking here longer than I've been alive. I'm sure we can make an exception this one time." After a moment's hesitation, the guard stepped aside, allowing Marcus to enter the bank. As he passed, Marcus couldn't help but notice the guard's refusal to meet his eyes. Mixture of embarrassment and lingering suspicion evident in his stance. Once inside, Sarah guided Marcus to her desk, her face a mask of professional calm belied by the tension in her shoulders. "Dr. Washington, I can't apologize enough for what just happened. Please, have a seat. Can I get you some water?" Marcus sank into the offered chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 62 years. "Thank you, Sarah. Water would be appreciated." As Sarah hurried off to fetch the water, Marcus found his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to wear off. He had faced discrimination before, was an unfortunate reality of being a black man in America, even one with his credentials and standing. But something about this incident felt different, more personal, somehow. Sarah returned with the water and a sympathetic smile. "Dr. Washington, I've already spoken to the branch manager. He's horrified by what happened and wants to speak with you personally. But first, how can I help you today?" Marcus took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. "I came to make a withdrawal for my daughter's wedding expenses. But to be honest, Sarah, I'm not sure I feel comfortable conducting any business here today." Sarah's face fell. "I completely understand, Dr. Washington. Is there anything I can do to help? Perhaps I could arrange for the withdrawal to be prepared and sent to your home?" Marcus considered the offer for a moment before shaking his head. "No, thank you. I think I need some time to process what just happened. I've banked here for decades, recommended this institution to countless friends and colleagues, and yet, because of how I'm dressed, because of the color of my skin, I was treated like a potential criminal." As Marcus spoke, he could see the impact of his words on Sarah. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears and her hands clenched tightly in her lap. This young woman, who had once been his student, was now witnessing firsthand the harsh realities he had lectured about in his sociology classes. "Dr. Washington," Sarah began, her voice thick with emotion, "I know nothing I say can make this right. But please know that what happened today does not reflect the values of everyone who works here. Many of us are committed to fighting against exactly this kind of discrimination." Marcus nodded, appreciating Sarah's sincerity. "I know, Sarah, and I'm grateful for your intervention. But this incident, it's not isolated. It's part of a larger pattern, one that's all too familiar to people who look like me." As they sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between them, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Evelyn, asking if he had remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. The mundane nature of the message served as a stark reminder of the world beyond the bank's walls. A world where life went on, oblivious to the indignities and injustices faced by people of color every day. Marcus stood, straightening his sweatshirt. "Thank you again, Sarah. I think I'll be heading home now. Please let the branch manager know I'll be in touch." Sarah rose as well, her professional demeanor wavering for a moment as she impulsively reached out to squeeze Marcus's hand. "Of course, Dr. Washington, and I'm so sorry for everything." As Marcus made his way back through the bank lobby, he could feel the eyes of other customers and employees upon him. Some gazes held sympathy, others curiosity, and a few, couldn't help but notice, contained a hint of the same suspicion he had encountered at the door. Stepping out into the sunlight, Marcus took a deep breath, trying to center himself. The day that had started so ordinarily had taken an unexpected and troubling turn. As he began the walk home, his mind raced with questions and a growing sense of unease. What would he tell Evelyn? How would this impact their relationship with the bank where they had entrusted their finances for so long? And perhaps most pressingly, how would he explain to Amelia that the deposits for her wedding might be delayed? But beyond these immediate concerns, Marcus felt a familiar fire kindling within him. The same passion for justice and equality that had driven him to pursue a career in sociology, dedicate his life to education and community activism, burned brightly once again. This incident, as painful and frustrating as it was, could not be allowed to pass without response. Marcus knew that his position of respect within the community, his connections, and his expertise could be powerful tools in addressing the systemic issues at play. As he walked, Marcus began to formulate a plan. This wouldn't be a simple complaint to the bank's corporate office. No, this called for something more substantial. A community-wide conversation about racial profiling, implicit bias, and the everyday indignities faced by people of color. By the time Marcus reached his home, a beautiful colonial-style house with a wraparound porch, his initial shock and anger had crystallized into determination. He climbed the steps, pausing for a moment to look back in the direction of the bank. "This isn't over," he murmured to himself, his voice low, filled with resolve. Not by a long shot. With that, Marcus opened the front door, stepping into the warmth of his home. The familiar scents of Evelyn's lavender candles and the faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen enveloped him. For a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the comfort of his sanctuary. But as he hung up his keys and prepared to share the morning's events with Evelyn, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The incident at the bank had opened old wounds, but it had also ignited a spark that, with careful nurturing, could grow into a beacon of change for Millbrook and beyond. Little did Marcus know that the events set in motion that Tuesday morning would not only change his life, but would have far-reaching consequences for the entire community. The story of a respected professor being denied entry to his own bank was about to become the catalyst for a movement that would challenge long-held assumptions, spark difficult conversations, and ultimately pave the way for meaningful change. As Marcus called out to Evelyn, preparing to recount the morning's events, couldn't have imagined the journey that lay ahead. A journey that would test his resolve, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately reaffirm his lifelong commitment to justice and equality. The stage was set, players were in motion, and Millbrook was about to become the unlikely epicenter of a struggle as old as America itself. And at the heart of it all stood Dr. Marcus Washington, a man whose dignity in the face of injustice would inspire a community to look deep within itself and confront the uncomfortable truths that had long lurked beneath its placid surface. The week leading up to the incident at First National Bank had been a whirlwind of activity for Dr. Marcus Washington. As he settled into his favorite armchair, preparing to recount the morning's events to his wife Evelyn, his mind drifted back to the previous Thursday, when the seeds of today's confrontation were unwittingly sown. Thursday had dawned bright and clear, a perfect September morning. Marcus had risen early, as was his habit, to enjoy a cup of coffee on the porch before heading to campus. As he sat, savoring the rich aroma of his brew, he noticed his neighbor, Tom Henderson, retrieving his morning paper. "Morning, Tom," Marcus called out, raising his mug in greeting. Tom, a man in his late 50s with a receding hairline and a perpetual scowl, barely glanced in Marcus's direction before hurrying back inside. This cold shoulder was nothing new. Tom had made it clear over the years that he wasn't interested in fostering neighborly relations with the Washington. Evelyn appeared at the door, wrapping her robe tightly around her. "That man," she sighed, shaking her head. "You'd think after 15 years he'd at least manage a good morning." Marcus shrugged, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Some people are slow to change, my dear, but we keep trying, don't we?" Evelyn leaned down to kiss her husband's cheek. "That we do. Now, don't forget we have dinner with the Taylors tonight." Amelia called. She wants to discuss wedding favors. As Marcus drove to the university, his mind was already racing with the day ahead. He had a full schedule of classes, a faculty meeting, and office hours where he hoped to make progress on his latest research paper. But underlying it all was a sense of anticipation for the evening's dinner engagement. The Taylors, James and Lydia, were relatively new to Millbrook. James had recently been appointed as the city's first black police chief, a move that had generated both excitement and tension within the community. Tonight's dinner was more than just a social call. It was an opportunity to discuss the challenges James faced and to strategize on how to build bridges between law enforcement and Millbrook's communities of color. Marcus's morning classes flew by in a blur of engaged discussions and thought-provoking questions. His Introduction to Sociology course was particularly lively, with students debating the impact of social media on modern relationships. As always, Marcus found himself energized by the young minds around him, their fresh perspectives challenging his own assumptions and keeping him on his toes. During his office hours, Marcus met with Jamal, a promising junior who was struggling to balance his academic commitments with his role as a student activist. As they talked, Marcus was reminded of his own college days, when he had marched for civil rights and protested against the Vietnam War. "Jamal," Marcus said, leaning forward in his chair, "your passion for justice is admirable. But remember, education is a powerful tool in the fight for equality. Don't let your activism come at the expense of your studies." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "I know, Dr. Washington. It's just, sometimes it feels like nothing ever changes, like we're fighting the same battles over and over." Marcus smiled sadly, understanding all too well the young man's frustration. "Change is slow, Jamal, but it does come. Look at Chief Taylor. When I was your age, the idea of a black police chief in a town like Millbrook would have seemed impossible. We keep pushing, keep educating, keep challenging the status quo. That's how progress happens." As Jamal left, visibly buoyed by their conversation, Marcus found himself reflecting on his own journey. From a working-class family in Detroit to a respected professor in a predominantly white Midwestern town, he had overcome numerous obstacles. But he never forgot the sacrifices of those who came before him, nor the responsibility he felt to pave the way for future generations. The faculty meeting that afternoon was largely uneventful, though Marcus did notice a few raised eyebrows when he proposed a new course on the sociology of race in America. Dr. Harriet Fleming, the department chair, had been supportive, but Marcus could sense reluctance from some of his colleagues. "It's a sensitive topic, Marcus," Dr. Richard Branson had said, his discomfort evident. "Are you sure this is the right time?" Marcus had fixed Richard with a steady gaze. "If not now, when, Richard? These are conversations we need to be having, especially in light of recent national events." Proposal had been tabled for further discussion, but Marcus left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. Change might be slow, but it was happening, one small step at a time. That evening, as Marcus and Evelyn prepared for dinner with the Taylors, atmosphere in their home was charged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Evelyn, a pediatrician known for her warm bedside manner and fierce advocacy for children's health, was putting the finishing touches on a peach cobbler. "Do you think James is settling in okay?" she asked, sliding the dessert into the oven. "Lydia mentioned he's been working long hours." Marcus nodded, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "I imagine it's not easy. He's got a tough job ahead of him, trying to reform the department while also gaining the trust of both his officers and the community." The dinner itself was a pleasant affair, filled with good food, lively conversation, and moments of shared laughter. But underlying it all was a current of tension, particularly when the conversation turned to James's experiences as police chief. "It's like walking a tightrope," James confided, his voice low. "Half the force sees me as an outsider, brought in to shake things up. The other half is waiting to see if I'll favor the black community. And then there's the public, with their own set of expectations and fears." Lydia reached out to squeeze her husband's hand. "Tell them about what happened at the supermarket, honey." James sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "It was nothing, really. Just, I was in line, in uniform, and this older white lady in front of me kept glancing back, clutching her purse tighter. Took me a moment to realize she didn't see the chief of police. She just saw a black man in a uniform that made her nervous." A heavy silence fell over the table. Marcus and Evelyn exchanged a look, years of shared experiences and unspoken understanding passing between them. "It's not nothing, James," Marcus said finally. "Those little incidents, they add up. They wear you down over time." Conversation that followed was deep and often uncomfortable, touching on issues of implicit bias, community policing, and the weight of representation. As the evening wound down, all four felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. "We should do this more often," Evelyn said as they saw the Taylors to the door. "It's important to have these conversations, to support each other." The next day, Friday, brought its own set of challenges. Marcus spent the morning grading papers, his red pen hovering over phrases that made him alternately proud of his students' insights and concerned about their blind spot. In the afternoon, he had a meeting with the university's diversity committee, where discussions about increasing minority faculty representation grew heated. We can't just lower our standards to meet some quota, a colleague had argued, oblivious to the offense his words caused. Marcus had taken a deep breath before responding. No one is suggesting lowering standards, Dr. Simmons. We're talking about expanding our search, about recognizing and valuing diverse experiences and perspectives, about acknowledging that merit isn't a neutral concept, but one often shaped by systemic advantages and disadvantages. The weekend passed in a blur of wedding planning with Amelia, household chores, and preparation for the coming week's classes. But throughout it all, Marcus found his mind returning to the conversations with James, the tensions simmering beneath Millbrook's placid surface. On Monday, as Marcus was leaving his last class of the day, he received a call from James Taylor. "Marcus," James said, his voice tight with stress, "I could use your advice. There's been an incident. A young black man arrested for suspicious behavior outside a jewelry store. The arresting officers swear it was justified. The kid's family is crying foul. Things are getting heated." Marcus listened intently as James laid out the detail. "This is delicate, James. We need to ensure a fair investigation while also addressing the community's concerns. Have you considered forming a citizens' review board?" Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, strategizing ways to de-escalate tensions and build trust. By the time they hung up, both men felt the weight of the work ahead, but also a sense of shared purpose. That night, as Marcus and Evelyn prepared for bed, he found himself more reflective than usual. "Penny for your thoughts?" Evelyn asked, settling beside him. Marcus sighed, pulling her close. "Just thinking about Millbrook, about how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Sometimes it feels like we're making progress, and other times..." Evelyn nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "We keep pushing, Marcus. It's what we've always done." As they drifted off to sleep, neither could have imagined how the events of the next day would test their resolve and challenge their community in ways they never expected. Tuesday dawned, and Marcus rose early as usual. As he dressed in his comfortable jeans and Millbrook University sweatshirt, he was focused on the day's errands, particularly the trip to the bank to withdraw money for Amelia's wedding expenses. The confrontation that awaited him was the furthest thing from his mind. Looking back, Marcus would later reflect on the irony of it all. How a week filled with discussions about race, equality, and community relations had culminated in such a personal and painful reminder of the work still to be done. The incident at the bank wouldn't just be about Marcus Washington being denied entry. It would become a flashpoint for all the tensions, fears, and hopes that had been simmering in Millbrook for years. As Marcus prepared to leave the house that fateful Tuesday morning, kissed Evelyn goodbye, his mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Little did he know that his routine trip to the bank would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change his life, but would force an entire community to confront its deepest held beliefs and prejudices. The stage was set, players were in place, and Millbrook was about to face a reckoning that had been generations in the making. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Marcus Washington, educator, mentor, and unwitting catalyst for change. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Washington family's living room as Marcus finished recounting the morning's events to Evelyn. His wife sat in stunned silence, her normally warm brown eyes clouded with a mix of anger and disbelief. "They wouldn't let you into the bank?" Evelyn repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our bank? Where we've been customers for over 3 decades. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the day's events settling heavily on his shoulders. "It was surreal, Evelyn. To be treated like a potential criminal simply because of how I looked." Evelyn rose from her seat, pacing the room with nervous energy. "We need to do something, Marcus. We can't let this stand. What if it had been Amelia, or one of our grandchildren?" As if summoned by her mother's words, Amelia's ringtone filled the room. Marcus answered, putting the call on speakerphone. "Dad? Mom? Are you okay? I just got a weird call from Sarah Chen." Amelia's voice crackled through the speaker, concern evident in her tone. Marcus and Evelyn exchanged a glance. News traveled fast in Millbrook. "We're fine, sweetheart," Marcus assured her. "There was an incident at the bank this morning, but I'm okay." Over the next few minutes, Marcus gave Amelia a condensed version of what had happened. As he spoke, he could hear his daughter's breathing quicken, a sure sign of her rising anger. "This is outrageous," Amelia exclaimed when Marcus finished. "Dad, you need to go public with this. People need to know what's happening right under their noses." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple, Amelia. Yes, what happened was wrong, but going public could have far-reaching consequences. For the bank employees, for the community. And what about the consequences for you, Dad?" Amelia challenged. "For people who look like us? How many others has this happened to who didn't have a former student to vouch for them?" Her words hung in the air, echoing the thoughts that had been swirling in Marcus's mind since the incident. Before he could respond, doorbell rang. Evelyn went to answer it, returning moments later with James Taylor in tow. Police Chief's usual composed demeanor was noticeably ruffled. "Marcus," James said, his voice tight. "I heard what happened. Are you all right?" As Marcus once again recounted the morning's events, he could see James's jaw clenching, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "This is exactly the kind of thing we were talking about the other night," James said when Marcus finished. "The everyday indignities, the constant suspicion, wears you down." Amelia's voice piped up from the phone, still on speaker. "Chief Taylor, surely there's something you can do? This has to be illegal, right?" James ran a hand over his face, his expression troubled. "It's complicated, Amelia. Yes, what happened was discriminatory, proving it in a legal sense. That's not always straightforward. And as the police chief, I have to be careful about how I involve myself in situations like this." The room fell silent as the weight of James's words sank in. Even with a black police chief, path to justice was far from clear. "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked, her voice small but determined. "We can't just let this go." Marcus stood, moving to the window. Outside, he could see the Hendersons' house across the street, Tom's car pulling into the driveway. An idea began to form in his mind. "We start a conversation," Marcus said slowly, turning back to face the room. "Not just about what happened to me, but about the larger issues at play. The biases, conscious and unconscious, that shape our interactions. The systemic barriers that persist, even in a town as progressive as Millbrook likes to think it is." James nodded, glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Community forum, perhaps? Bring together leaders from different sectors, business, education, law enforcement, religious institutions?" "Yes," Marcus agreed, warming to the idea. "But not just leaders. We need to hear from everyday citizens, too. People who've experienced discrimination, as well as those who might not realize their own biases." As they continued to discuss the possibilities, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming email. It was from Sarah Chen at the bank. "Dr. Washington, I hope this email finds you well, given the circumstance. I wanted to follow up on this morning's incident and let you know that the branch manager, Mr. Douglas, would very much like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. He is deeply troubled by what occurred and wants to discuss how the bank can make amends. Additionally, I've taken the liberty of preparing the withdrawal you originally came in for. If you're comfortable, I can arrange for a secure delivery to your home, or we can hold it for you at the branch until you're ready to come in. Again, I cannot express how sorry I am for what happened. Please let me know how you'd like to proceed. Sincerely, Sarah Chen." Marcus read the email aloud, noting the mix of reactions from those in the room. Amelia, still on speakerphone, was the first to respond. "They're trying to cover their tracks," she said, tone skeptical. "Damage control." "Maybe," James conceded, "but it's also an opportunity. Marcus, if you meet with the branch manager, you could push for concrete changes in their policies and training." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "And having the bank's support could lend weight to the community forum idea. They have influence in the business community." As they debated the pros and cons of engaging with the bank, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to his students, to Jamal and others like him who were fighting for change. He thought of the countless discussions he'd led in his classrooms about systemic racism and the power of collective action. "I'll meet with Mr. Douglas," Marcus decided finally. "But not just to discuss what happened to me. We'll use this as a starting point for a larger conversation about race and equity in Millbrook." With a plan beginning to take shape, energy in the room shifted. James started making calls to community leaders, while Evelyn reached out to her contacts in the local medical community. Amelia, her voice filled with pride, volunteered to create a social media campaign to raise awareness about the upcoming forum. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself both exhausted and exhilarated. The incident at the bank had been painful, a stark reminder of the prejudices that still lurked beneath the surface of their community. But it had also ignited a spark, bringing together allies and opening up new possibilities for dialogue and change. Around 9 p.m., as James was preparing to leave, Marcus's phone rang again. It was Dr. Harriet Fleming, department chair. "Marcus," he said, her voice filled with concern. "I've just heard about what happened. Are you all right? Do you need anything?" Marcus felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "I'm okay, Harriet. Thank you for calling. Actually, there is something you could help with." Over the next few minutes, Marcus outlined the idea for the community forum. Harriet listened intently, occasionally interjecting with suggestions. "Marcus, this is exactly the kind of community engagement we've been talking about," he said when he finished. "The university should absolutely be involved. Let me talk to the dean. I think we could host the forum on campus, give it some institutional backing." By the time Marcus hung up, the plans for the forum were growing more concrete by the minute. What had started as a response to a personal slight was evolving into something much larger, a catalyst for community-wide introspection and, hopefully, meaningful change. As the clock struck midnight, Marcus and Evelyn finally found themselves alone, the house quiet after hours of phone calls and planning. "What a day," Evelyn sighed, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Are you sure you're okay, love?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I'm processing," said finally. "What happened this morning was deeply upsetting, but seeing how everyone has rallied, the possibilities that are opening up, I can't help but feel a glimmer of hope." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "You've always been an optimist, Marcus Washington. One of the things I love most about you." As they prepared for bed, Marcus's mind was already racing with plans for the coming days. He would need to craft a careful response to Sarah's email, prepare for the meeting with Mr. Douglas, and start outlining topics for the community forum. There was so much to be done. But underlying all the practical considerations was a deeper current of thought. Marcus found himself reflecting on the long arc of history, on the struggles and triumphs of those who had come before him. He thought of his parents, who had marched for civil rights, and of his grandparents, who had fled the Jim Crow South in search of a better life. What would they think of Millbrook, the life he and Evelyn had built here? Would they be disappointed that their son still faced discrimination in 2023? Or would they see the response to this incident, outpouring of support, a willingness to engage in difficult conversations, as a sign of progress? As Marcus drifted off to sleep, one thought crystallized in his mind. This incident, painful as it was, could be a turning point. Not just for him or for the bank, but for Millbrook as a whole. It was an opportunity to push their community to live up to its highest ideals, to bridge the gap between rhetoric and reality when it came to issues of race and equality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and undoubtedly some pushback from those resistant to change. But Marcus felt ready to face it all, buoyed by the support of his family, friends, and allies. In the quiet of the night, as the Washington household finally settled into sleep, the wheels of change were already in motion. Across Millbrook, people were talking, questioning, and reflecting. The ripple effect of one man being turned away from a bank was spreading, touching lives and challenging assumptions in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all was Dr. Marcus Washington, educator, husband, father, and now catalyst for a community's reckoning with its past and its hopes for the future. As he slept, Marcus couldn't have known the full extent of what the coming days would bring. But somewhere deep in his subconscious, a familiar fire was burning, the same fire that had driven him throughout his life, pushing him to educate, challenge, and to strive for a more just and equitable world. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and Millbrook was about to embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. The incident at the bank was just the beginning. The real work, Hard, necessary work of confronting biases, changing systems, and building a truly inclusive community was yet to come. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity for Dr. Marcus Washington. As news of the incident at First National Bank spread through Millbrook, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing storm of public opinion, media attention, and community activism. Wednesday morning dawned bright and clear, but Marcus barely noticed the weather as he sat at his desk, composing a carefully worded email to Sarah Chen and Mr. Douglas at the bank. After several drafts and consultations with Evelyn, he finally settled on a message that was firm yet constructive. Dear Ms. Chen and Mr. Douglas, thank you for your follow-up regarding the incident at First National Bank on Tuesday morning. I appreciate your willingness to discuss this matter further. While I understand that you may view this as an isolated incident, I believe it speaks to larger systemic issues that require addressing. I would be willing to meet with you to discuss not only my personal experience, but also how we can work together to ensure that such discriminatory practices are eliminated for all customers. I propose that we use this unfortunate event as a catalyst for positive change. To that end, I would like to invite First National Bank to participate in an upcoming community forum on race, equity, and inclusion in Millbrook. This forum will bring together leaders from various sectors of our community to have an open and honest dialogue about the challenges we face and how we can create a more inclusive environment for all our citizens. Please let me know your thoughts on this proposal and when you would be available to meet. Sincerely, Dr. Marcus Washington. As Marcus hit send, he felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. How would the bank respond? Would they see this as an opportunity for growth, or would they retreat into a defensive posture? His musings were interrupted by a knock on his office door. It was Jamal, the student activist he had spoken with just days before. Dr. Washington, Jamal said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and concern. I heard about what happened at the bank. Are you okay? What can we do to help? Marcus gestured for Jamal to take a seat, touched by the young man's earnestness. I'm all right, Jamal. Thank you for asking. As for what we can do, well, that's what I'd like to discuss with you. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined the plans for the community forum, watching as Jamal's expression shifted from outrage to excitement. This is huge, Dr. Washington, Jamal said, leaning forward in his chair. We've been trying to get the administration to take these issues seriously for years. But with your influence behind it, this could really make a difference. Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of pride in his student's passion. I'm glad you see the potential, Jamal, but I want you to understand, this won't be easy. We're likely to face resistance, maybe even backlash. Are you prepared for that? Jamal's jaw set in determination. We've faced resistance before, Dr. Washington. This time feels different. People are listening. We can't let this opportunity slip away. As Jamal left, promising to rally his fellow student activists, Marcus turned his attention to the stack of messages that had accumulated since yesterday. There were emails from colleagues expressing support, calls from local media outlets seeking interviews, and even a message from the mayor's office requesting a meeting. One email, however, stood out from the rest. It was from Tom Henderson, his neighbor, who had always been cold and distant. Dr. Washington, I heard about what happened at the bank. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I know we haven't always been on the best terms, but no one should be treated that way. If there's anything I can do to help with this community forum you're planning, please let me know. Henderson. Marcus read the email twice, hardly believing his eyes. Could this be the same Tom who had barely acknowledged his existence for years? It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it felt like a sign that real change might be possible. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself juggling multiple roles: professor, activist, community leader. He taught his classes with his usual passion, but now there was an added urgency to his lectures on social inequality and systemic racism. His students, many of whom had heard about the bank incident, listened with rapt attention, engaging in discussions that spilled over long after the class had ended. In between classes, Marcus fielded calls from James Taylor, updating him on the growing support for the community forum, and from Harriet Fleming, who had secured the university's largest auditorium for the event. By the time Marcus returned home that evening, he was exhausted but exhilarated. Evelyn greeted him with a warm embrace and news of her own efforts to rally support among her medical colleagues. "The hospital administration is on board," she reported as they sat down to dinner. "They're willing to co-sponsor the forum and provide resources for a health equity panel." Marcus smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his wife's hand. "You're amazing, you know that? Couldn't do this without you." As they ate, Marcus and Evelyn discussed the challenges ahead. They knew that not everyone in Millbrook would be receptive to the conversation they were trying to start. There would be those who would deny the existence of systemic racism, others who would accuse them of stirring up trouble, and some who would actively work to undermine their effort. "We need to be prepared for the pushback," Evelyn said, her expression serious. "This isn't going to be easy, Marcus." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I know, but it's necessary, Evelyn. We don't take this stand now, then when?" Their conversation was interrupted by a breaking news alert on Marcus's phone. A local news station had picked up the story of the bank incident and was running it as their lead item. Marcus and Evelyn watched in stunned silence as the anchor recounted the events, complete with an interview with a witness who had been in the bank that day. "Oh, Marcus," Evelyn breathed, reaching for her husband's hand as they listened to the sensationalized account. "Are you ready for this? Once this airs, there's no going back." Marcus felt a moment of doubt, flicker of fear at the public scrutiny that was about to descend on their lives. But then he thought of Jamal and his fellow students, of James Taylor's daily struggles as a black police chief, of all the unnamed individuals who had faced similar indignities without the platform to speak out. "We have to be ready," he said finally, voice firm. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about our community, about the future we want to build." As the news segment ended, Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. There were messages of support from friends and colleagues, but also angry emails from strangers accusing him of playing the race card and stirring up unnecessary controversy. One message in particular caught Marcus's attention. It was from Mr. Douglas at the bank. "Dr. Washington, I've just seen the news report about the incident at our bank. I want to assure you that we take this matter very seriously. I would like to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss how we can address this situation and participate in your proposed community forum. Please let me know when you would be available. Sincerely, Robert Douglas, Branch Manager, First National Bank." As Marcus showed the email to Evelyn, he felt a glimmer of hope. The bank's willingness to engage, to be part of the solution, rather than retreating into denial or legal defenses, was a positive sign. "This is good, right?" Evelyn asked, reading over the message. Marcus nodded slowly. "It's a start, but the real test will be in their actions, not just their words." As they prepared for bed that night, Marcus and Evelyn were acutely aware that their lives had shifted in a fundamental way. The incident at the bank had thrust them into the spotlight, making them the focal point of a community-wide debate on race and equity. "Are we ready for this?" Evelyn asked as they lay in bed, her voice small in the darkness. Marcus pulled her close, drawing strength from her presence. "I don't know if anyone is ever truly ready for something like that," he admitted. "But we have each other, we have our principles, and we have a community that's willing to engage. That's a start." As Marcus drifted off to sleep, his mind was already racing with plans for the coming days. There would be meetings to attend, interviews to give, a forum to organize. But underlying all of these tasks was a sense of purpose, feeling that they were on the cusp of something important. The next morning, as Marcus prepared to leave for campus, he paused at the front door, looking out at the quiet street. Millbrook looked the same as it always had. Tidy lawns, well-maintained houses, neighbors going about their morning routines. But Marcus knew that beneath this placid surface, currents of change were stirring. He thought of James Taylor, facing the dual challenges of reforming his police department and gaining the trust of a skeptical community. He thought of Jamal and his fellow student activists, their youthful energy and idealism pushing against the inertia of the status quo. He thought of Sarah Chen at the bank, caught between her loyalty to her employer and her sense of right and wrong. He thought of himself, Dr. Marcus Washington, professor of sociology, husband, father, and now, reluctantly but resolutely, a symbol of the fight for equity and justice in Millbrook. As he stepped out into the morning sun, Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, and with the support of his family, his allies, and a community willing to engage in difficult conversations, Marcus felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did he know that the true test of his resolve, and of Millbrook's commitment to change, was yet to come. The community forum, still days away, would become a flashpoint for tensions that had long simmered beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic town, and Dr. Marcus Washington would find himself at the center of a storm that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his community, colleagues, and himself. As Marcus drove to campus, the streets of Millbrook, busy with morning traffic, didn't shake the feeling that he was driving towards something momentous. The incident at the bank had been a spark. The fire it had ignited was growing, fueled by years of unaddressed grievances and unacknowledged biases. Coming days would test the fabric of Millbrook's community, forcing its citizens to confront uncomfortable truths and make difficult choices. And through it all, Dr. Marcus Washington would stand as a beacon of hope, a voice for change, and a testament to the power of one individual to spark a movement. The stage was set, players were in motion, and Millbrook was about to face a reckoning that had been generations in the making. As Marcus pulled into his parking spot at the university, he took a moment to center himself, drawing strength from the memory of those who had fought similar battles before him. "All right," he murmured to himself, stepping out of the car. "Let's do this." With that, Marcus straightened his shoulders and walked towards his office, ready to face whatever the day might bring. The journey ahead would be challenging, but it was one he was prepared to undertake, for himself, for his community, and for the hope of a better, more equitable future for all. The day of the community forum dawned with an air of anticipation that seemed to hang over all of Millbrook. As Dr. Marcus Washington stood at the podium in the university's largest auditorium, he looked out over a sea of faces, some familiar, some strange, all united by a shared sense that they were about to be part of something important. The weeks leading up to this moment had been a whirlwind of activity. Marcus had met with Mr. Douglas from First National Bank, engaging in frank discussions about the incident and the bank's policy. To Marcus's surprise and cautious optimism, Mr. Douglas had been receptive to change, agreeing to implement new training programs and review hiring practices to promote diversity. James Taylor had worked tirelessly to ensure a balanced police presence at the forum, enough to maintain security without creating an atmosphere of intimidation. Evelyn had coordinated with healthcare professionals to address racial disparities in medical treatment. Jamal and his fellow student activists had mobilized, spreading the word and ensuring a strong youth presence at the event. Now, as Marcus prepared to open the forum, felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are here today because of an incident. An incident that, on the surface, might seem small. A man denied entry to a bank. But as we all know, it's not about one man or one bank. It's about the systemic issues that allow such incidents to occur and the courage it takes to address them head-on." As Marcus spoke, he could see the audience hanging on his every word. In the front row, Evelyn sat with Amelia, both women's eyes shining with pride. James Taylor was there too, his police uniform a stark reminder of the complexities they faced. Mr. Douglas from the bank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his presence was a positive sign. The forum unfolded over several hours, featuring panel discussions, personal testimonies, and breakout sessions. The conversations were often difficult, sometimes heated, but always necessary. One particularly poignant moment came when Tom Henderson, Marcus's once distant neighbor, stood up to speak. "I've lived in Millbrook for 30 years, Tom began, his voice shaky, "and I've always prided myself on not being racist. But listening to these stories today, I'm starting to realize that not being racist isn't enough. We need to be actively anti-racist. And that starts with acknowledging our own biases. Dr. Washington, he said, turning to Marcus, I owe you an apology, not just for the way I've treated you over the years, but for my complacency in the face of injustice. The auditorium fell silent, the weight of Tom's words hanging in the air. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for Tom's honesty, sadness for the years of missed connection, and hope for what this moment of vulnerability might inspire in others. As the forum progressed, it became clear that this was more than just a discussion about one incident. It was a long overdue conversation about the soul of Millbrook itself. People spoke of workplace discrimination, of educational inequities, the subtle and not so subtle ways that racism manifested in their daily lives. There were tense moments too. Some attendees pushed back against the idea of systemic racism, arguing that Millbrook was a welcoming community for all. But for every voice of denial, there were others ready to share their experiences, challenge assumptions, and to push for change. By the time the forum ended, well past its scheduled time, there was a palpable sense of both exhaustion and exhilaration in the room. People lingered, continuing discussions in small groups, exchanging contact information, making plans for follow-up actions. As Marcus gathered his notes, preparing to leave, he was approached by a young reporter from the local newspaper. Dr. Washington, she said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm, what do you hope will be the lasting impact of tonight's forum? Marcus paused, considering the question carefully. I hope, he said finally, that this is just the beginning, that we've opened a door, can't be closed, that from this day forward, Millbrook will be a community that doesn't just talk about equality, but actively works towards it, every single day. In the weeks and months that followed, Marcus would often look back on that night as a turning point, not just for him, but for Millbrook as a whole. The immediate aftermath saw a flurry of activity. First National Bank, true to Mr. Douglas's word, implemented new training programs and revised its policy. The police department, under James Taylor's leadership, launched a community outreach initiative aimed at building trust with minority neighborhoods. At the university, Marcus's proposed course on the sociology of race in America was not only approved but oversubscribed, with students from across disciplines eager to engage with these crucial issues. But perhaps the most significant changes were the ones that couldn't be measured in policies, programs. There was a new awareness in Millbrook, a willingness to have difficult conversations, to challenge long-held assumptions, to listen to voices that had too often been marginalized. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and moments of frustration. Some residents resisted change, clinging to old prejudices. But slowly, steadily, Millbrook began to transform. A year after the forum, Marcus stood once again at a podium, this time to accept a Community Leadership Award. As he looked out at the audience, more diverse now than it had been a year ago, he felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for what his community had accomplished. A year ago, he began, I stood before many of you and spoke about an incident that shook me to my core. Today, I stand here not to dwell on that moment, but to celebrate how far we've come since then. We've had difficult conversations, we've faced uncomfortable truths, we've made mistakes and learned from them. But most importantly, we've grown, as individuals and as a community. He paused, his eyes finding Evelyn in the crowd. She smiled encouragingly, and he drew strength from her unwavering support. Our work is far from over, Marcus continued. Building a truly equitable society is the work of generations. But I believe that years from now, we'll look back on this time as the moment when Millbrook decided to be on the right side of history. When we chose to confront our biases, to uplift the marginalized, create a community where everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background, can feel truly at home. As applause filled the room, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his family, who had stood by him through every challenge. Gratitude for allies like James Taylor and Harriet Fleming, who had lent their voices and influence to the cause. Gratitude for young activists like Jamal, whose passion and idealism kept pushing the movement forward. And gratitude even for those who had resisted change, for they had provided the friction necessary for growth. In the years that followed, Millbrook would become known as a model for community-driven social change. Researchers would study their initiatives, other towns would seek to emulate their program. But for Marcus, the true measure of success was in the small, everyday changes he witnessed. It was in the diverse group of children playing together in the park, their laughter a melody of harmony and inclusion. It was in the local businesses proudly displaying "All are welcome here" signs in their windows. It was in the expanded curriculum at Millbrook High School, now including comprehensive units on African American history and literature. And yes, it was even in First National Bank, where a new generation of employees, trained in cultural competency and committed to equitable service, greeted customers of all backgrounds with genuine warmth and respect. 5 years after the incident that had started it all, Marcus found himself once again standing outside First National Bank. This time, he was there to witness the unveiling of a plaque, a commitment cast in bronze to the principles of equality and inclusion. As the small crowd gathered for the ceremony, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah Chen, a former loan officer who had come to his aid that fateful day. "Dr. Washington," she said, her eyes shining, "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, it changed everything. Not just for the bank, for all of us." Marcus smiled, clasping her hand warmly. "We did it together, Sarah, all of us." As the ceremony began, Marcus looked around at the faces in the crowd. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, young, old, a true reflection of Millbrook's diversity. He thought about how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The journey hadn't been easy, and it was far from over. But as Marcus listened to the speakers talk about Millbrook's transformation, he felt a profound sense of hope. Hope for his community, hope for his country, and hope for a future where the color of one's skin truly didn't matter. As the plaque was unveiled, its words etched deeply into the metal, Marcus read them silently to himself. Dedicated to equality, justice, and the unwavering belief that every individual deserves respect and dignity. May we never forget the lessons of our past as we work towards a more inclusive future. In that moment, standing in front of the very bank that had once denied him entry, Dr. Marcus Washington felt the full circle of their journey. The incident that had sparked outrage had led to introspection, which had fueled action, which had ultimately resulted in transformation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still work to be done, battles to be fought, minds to be changed. But it was progress, real and tangible. And for Marcus, for Millbrook, and for all those who had been part of this journey, it was a testament to what could be accomplished when a community came together to confront its challenges head-on. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Marcus felt a familiar hand slip into his. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the same mix of pride and determination he felt in his heart. "Ready to go home?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. As they walked away from the bank, towards the Millbrook they had helped shape, he felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they would face them together, as a family, as a community, as fellow human beings, united in the pursuit of justice and equality. And in that pursuit, Marcus knew, lay the true measure of their success. Not in plaques or awards or recognition, but in the small, daily acts of kindness, understanding, and inclusion that were slowly but surely becoming the norm in Millbrook. As they turned the corner towards home, Marcus looked back one last time at the bank, plaque glinting in the sunlight. It was more than a symbol. It was a promise to remember, to persevere, and to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacle. For Dr. Marcus Washington, for Millbrook, and for communities everywhere striving for equality, the work continued. But now, they moved forward with hope, with purpose, and with the unshakable belief that change was not only possible, was inevitable.